The insecurity created in Europe by World War I set the stage for another international conflict, World War II, which broke out 2 decades later. Adolf Hitler rose to power as the leader of the Nazi Party in Germany. He rearmed his nation and launched his evil plan for world domination. Hitler's invasion of Poland in September of 1939 caused Great Britain and France to finally declare war on Germany, marking the beginning of the Second Great War. In April 1940, the war really took off when Germany invaded Norway and occupied Denmark. By May, German forces swept through Belgium and the Netherlands in what became known as Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. Just days later, Hitler's troops crossed into France and forced British troops to evacuate by sea at Dunkirk. With France on the verge of collapse, Italy's fascist dictator Benito Mussolini formed an alliance with Hitler, the Pact of Steel, and joined the Axis powers. On June 14, 1940, German forces entered the city of Paris, and France officially fell to German occupation. Hitler then turned his attention to Britain, which had the defensive advantage of being separated from the European continent by the English Channel. To pave the way for an invasion, German planes bombed Britain mercilessly. From September 1940 until May of 1941, it was known as the Blitz. The British Royal Air Force finally defeated the German Luftwaffe, and Hitler postponed his plans to invade. With Britain's resources nearly tapped, Prime Minister Winston Churchill negotiated crucial aid from the United States in early 1941. Meanwhile, on the European continent, German troops had conquered Yugoslavia and Greece. Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria were also forced to join the Axis powers. An emboldened Hitler then ordered the invasion of the Soviet Union in June of 1941. With Britain and the European allies facing Germany, the United States was the only nation capable of combating increased Japanese aggression in the Pacific. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise attack on the key U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, claiming the lives of more than 2,300 troops. This attack unified public opinion in America, and the next day, Congress declared war on Japan. Germany and the other Axis powers promptly declared war on the United States, making World War II a true global conflict. After a long string of Japanese victories, the U.S. Pacific Fleet won the Battle of Midway in June of 1942, which proved to be a turning point in the Pacific Front. By mid-1943, the Allied Navy began a series of assaults on key Japanese-held islands. This island-hopping strategy proved successful, and Allied forces moved closer to their ultimate goal of invading mainland Japan. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets launched a counteroffensive in November of 1942. This ended the Battle of Stalingrad, which saw some of the bloodiest combat of World War II. Ultimately, it was the harsh winter and dwindling supplies that spelled the end for German troops on the Eastern Front, and the last of them surrendered on January 31st, 1943. Meanwhile, Allied forces defeated the Axis powers in North Africa. An Allied invasion of Italy soon followed, and Mussolini's government fell by July 1943. Then came June 6, 1944, D-Day, when the Allied powers began a massive invasion of Europe, landing 156,000 American, British, and Canadian troops on the beaches of Normandy, France. In response, Hitler poured the remaining strength of his army into Western Europe. He gathered his forces for the last major German offensive of the war, known as the Battle of the Bulge. Then, after a period of intense Allied bombing, the Allied powers finally invaded Germany in February of 1945. Germany formally surrendered on May 8th, shortly after Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, heavy Allied casualties at the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and the fears of an even greater bloodshed in a land invasion of Japan, led U.S. President Harry Truman to authorize the use of a new, devastating weapon. Developed during a top-secret operation codenamed the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb was dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in early August of 1945.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past.
A couple of days later, the Japanese Empire was finished. On September 2nd, 1945, U.S. General Douglas MacArthur accepted Japan's formal surrender aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Through blood, courage, and moral resolve, the United States and Allied powers finally won the war in 1945. However, over 6 years, World War II took more lives and destroyed more property around the world than any conflict in history. Among the estimated 50 to 70 million people killed, 6 million Jews were murdered in Nazi concentration camps as part of Hitler's evil final solution, or what we know today as the Holocaust. This is the World War II Memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Dedicated by President George W. Bush in May of 2004, it's the first national memorial dedicated to all Americans who served during World War II. There were 16 million who served in the U.S. military, more than 400,000 of which who gave their lives. The memorial consists of 56 pillars and a pair of triumphal arches surrounding a square and fountain. Each pillar is inscribed with one of the 48 states that existed in 1945, as well as the District of Columbia, the Alaska Territory, the Territory of Hawaii, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The northern arch represents the Atlantic, and the southern arch represents the Pacific. This announcement stone says it all. Here in the presence of Washington and Lincoln, one the 18th century father and the other the 19th century preserver of our nation, we honor those 20th century Americans who took up the struggle during the Second World War and made the sacrifices to perpetuate the gift our forefathers entrusted to us, a nation conceived in liberty and justice. The World War II Memorial has two inconspicuous engravings that say Kilroy was here. This funny-looking doodle became popular graffiti for American GIs to leave around the battlefields. The saying became a source of unity, pride, and support. On the home front, manufacturers of everything from ships to tanks to crates of food would hide the Kilroy was here squiggle on their shipments. That way, service members would be inspired when they found the hidden drawing during their deployments overseas. This is the Freedom Wall on the west side of the Memorial Plaza, with the reflecting pool and the Lincoln Memorial behind it. The Freedom Wall has 4,048 gold stars, each of which represents 100 Americans who died in World War II. On the front of the wall, we read, "Here we mark the price of freedom." To this day, we owe a debt of gratitude to America's greatest generation, the men and women who served in World War II, at home and abroad.